Hi, I'm John Hovanesian, and this is a Zoom recording of a conversation with my good friend and one of the giants in the eye care industry, Jim Mazzo, who is with a number of different companies and was formerly the head of the ophthalmic business for Zeiss Ophthalmics globally. Jim, welcome.
Well, thanks, John. Very nice to see you. I hope this finds you, the family, and all of our listeners in good shape during these interesting times, as I'm calling it now.
Yeah, we keep calling them interesting times, weird times, challenging times, historic times, and they certainly are all of the above. And that's kind of what we thought we might talk about today is because we had a similar conversation to this just a number of weeks ago, probably a couple months ago, during the early part of the shutdown. We're now in August, almost September, and it's time to say, hey, where are we going next? And
Right.
Quite an interesting time. First of all, you've gotten rid of the beard, which was a, kind of a
I
profitable.
have. I have. I got rid of my COVID beard because I figured maybe COVID's going to last a little longer than I thought. So, and people had given me feedback that it was accentuating my nose, which is a scary thought right there, John. So I decided to stop that.
I'm not going to take the bait on that one. I'm not going to pick on your nose because I've got a very healthy one.
There you go. There you
My
go.
wife says she never knew somebody who could smoke a cigar in the rain, except me. So we're not going to go
That's
to
a
the nose
good
job.
one.
We're not going
That's
to
a
go to the
good
nose
one.
job. But let's talk maybe first about because you interact constantly with doctors around the world, and to find out how they're doing. What are you hearing from them about how their practices are doing? We're now, are they open? What's the status now?
Yeah, so, it's an interesting in my discussions because what I try to do is I probably talk to about 50 to 75 physicians every week now via Zoom across the globe to get this feeling because I'm always careful of answering a question that might be specific to a geography, but I'll start on a global basis. I think I'll probably end on the US. So we've all read that Asia has actually come back. They were the first to identify. And I think overall it's true, but I have to say you have to segment that. And what I've heard is Korea actually has done extremely well, and parts of China are back. And in fact, both Korea and parts of China are actually on a year-to-date basis better than last year, even with the COVID issues. But then if you think about Japan actually has been down. So you've got to be somewhat careful on talking about quote unquote Asia. And India, somewhat down in comparison to what they expected. So different parts there. Unfortunately, I feel that Europe, of all the regions, has taken the biggest hit. They've done a great job of trying to contain, but what I've seen and heard is that Europe is really still lagging behind the rest of the world on the recovery. And obviously Europe is a big term, but I think Southern Europe is actually worse than Northern Europe. France, Spain, Italy, that region really having a tough time coming back, where some of the Nordic countries, the Germanic countries, coming back at a better rate. And then if you look at the US, it's been very interesting. In the last 30 days, I have heard that practices have actually done better on a year-to-date basis than they were doing a year ago. Now, I'm going to say that with the following caveat across all geographies. First off, there is a tremendous pent-up demand. So let's be very careful on that pent-up demand now coming back in. Second off, I think you have to look at the demographics. And I don't know what it's like in your practice, John, but I'm hearing a lot more about the younger group coming in and that some of the older group are a little more pensive about coming into a office environment, which we'll talk about. I also, though, think the other one is that I've heard revenues are up, but maybe not units. And what I mean by that is I think refractive procedures, refractive IOLs are a little higher in penetration of the overall procedures. And so thus revenues are up, but maybe patients aren't. So I think on an average in the US, I'm hearing about 80 to 85%. But I'll leave you with the one last thought. I really want to see what your October, November, December bookings are, because that will get past that pent up demand, the people who are ready to come back in. But what does October, November, December look like? Now, some people have told me they're seeing a little better return, but I'm still a little cautious on the balance of who's walking in the office versus who's not.
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense. You know, I can tell you in our practice, which is 16 physicians, we've done a lot of contact with patients who were, you know, had appointments before the shutdown and that had to be canceled. It's about 11% of them gave us feedback that they just weren't ready to come back. You know, they were not comfortable, despite all the many precautions that we and other practices are taking. You know, but another thing I want to ask you about is our workforce. So we've got a very specialized workforce. You can't just hire somebody and put them on the floor doing workups. Have you heard from other practices about difficulties in bringing people back? Because in many cases, unemployment's paying better than working. What are you hearing there?
Actually, John, it's a great question, because I hear that more than some other things, that the staffing has been the biggest issue. They've either lost people who said they're not coming back, or people have delayed in coming back. And that's a tremendous impact on a great practice like yours, because you rely so much on that staff to get that patient flow through. Because one of the critical challenges I think we have to look at is productivity now per office. And productivity is not just the type of procedure you're doing, but are you getting that patient through from a flow standpoint? Are they able to make the appointment? Are they following through? Anytime you get a brand new staffer, as you know, just one, it's all of a sudden you feel that impact. Imagine 50% of your office not coming up. And that's what's happening. So it's a great question. And I'm actually really concerned, because I've heard that some people have said, my team has said, several of them, I'm not coming back. So if you lost your main OR nurse, or your key receptionist there, or somebody who works on the financing, those three positions alone are so hard to get somebody that knows. That's a big concern for a practice, a huge concern for a practice.
And it's true, whether it's management who have a lot of that institutional knowledge that's so difficult to replace, or just the folks who are doing workups, you know, the technicians and surgical counselors. Really, when you lose one person, you lose two, right? Because when you bring in a new person, you've got to train them, and that takes somebody else at least partially out of commission.
Yes.
So it's a very difficult problem to solve. You know, and so many of us were proud that we didn't have a lot of layoffs. We didn't have to release our staff. We may have furloughed them temporarily, but that we were bringing them back. But then we only found that not all of them were willing to come back. Or able to come back, and of course they have changes in their lives. They go on to go back to school, or something else changes. They're caring for a loved one, or their kids are, you know, not going back to school, and they have to stay home and take care of them. So there's a lot of ripple effects of what's happening throughout the economy on our practices. You mentioned an interesting thing, the fact that while units are not up, sales are up, or revenues are up in many practices. Do you sense that that's some of the premium services, and how do you see the shutdown and the pandemic affecting those, whether it's LASIK or premium IOLs or aesthetics or optical? What are you hearing there?
Well, and I think this is a global answer, but pretty much in the well-established US, China, mainstay Europe is what my comments are going to be attributed to, where the higher penetration of refractive IOLs. I truly see that this is gained because of the following. If I'm going to have less patients, I better be able to make my operating margins up. And so the best way to have operating margin is if you can get a product that's actually a higher ASP than the traditional product. So I think what's happening is yourself, people that are owned by private equity, et cetera, we see a heavier push towards the premium IOLs. And the good news too is there's been some new premium IOLs introduced recently by various amount of companies that have helped. The other is that younger population, quote unquote, is coming in at a greater accelerated rate. And that younger population has a greater affinity, I should say, for a LASIK SMILE procedure and or a refractive IOL. So you've got a couple momentums going in the right way. One, you're able to have a little more time, and thus that time can be attributed to a higher type of with regards to a refractive IOL. And that demographic is moving into a more willingness to come into your office, and they're a LASIK, SMILE, refractive IOL. So I see this continuing, and I don't see this going away, because I think every one of your practices are having to say, I still have to pay the light bill, I still have to pay my staff, and if I'm having less units, I better make that productivity at a higher rate at the top line.
Yeah, I agree. We're going to explore this a little bit more in our next session, in our next recording. So I invite all our viewers to watch out for that one and view it when it's available on Helio. I'm John Hovanesian, and meanwhile, I want to thank Jim Mazzo for doing this first recording with us.
Thanks, John.